If you're looking for clear, pro-life thinking, cutting-edge apologetics, and a fresh approach to abortion dialogue, you've come to the right place. This is the Equipped for Life podcast.
Okay, so today we want to try to help pro-life people understand something that's going on, I think a lot of times, maybe even most of the time, underneath the surface for pro-choice people. You will hear it said explicitly sometimes by the super clear, the pro-choice people have really thought about this. They've also taken an online course about it. But like for the most part, I think this is a thing that's going on underneath the surface, maybe even for the majority of pro-choice people, but it's not being said. And those are the things sometimes, if you can get at those, you can be so much more persuasive as a pro-life person because you're going to understand what's going on for them better. And this is an area where pro-life and pro-choice culture is just different. It is not surprising to say that it feels weird or at least different for pro-lifers sometimes. For pro-life people tend to have a lot of compassion for the baby. They are concerned for the baby, and pro-choice people have a lot of compassion, obviously, for the woman. It doesn't mean pro-life people are not compassionate about women. I'm just saying, like, we're focused mostly on the baby. They are focused mostly on the woman, and there is this tug of war kind of thing going on. And Rachel, you had a really interesting thought about one of the reasons underneath the surface that pro-choice people don't feel very, emotionally pulled toward like feeling compassion for the baby. So talk about that.
Yeah, I think sometimes when pro-choice people are dialoguing with a pro-life person, there's this like frustration or confusion about why we care about the embryo so much. They feel it's weird to put them both on equal playing field when you're talking about moral consideration or
equal right to life or something like that.
Right, equal rights. Like, how could you say that this fetus should have equal rights with the woman? For them, sometimes that feels kind of confusing because there's this strong driving sentiment that is, well, the woman is already here. Shouldn't we take care of people that already exist? Like, she has hopes, dreams, desires, relationships. She is a fully developed person like you and I, and shouldn't we care for the woman that's already here and prioritize her life over this embryo that doesn't have any of those things?
Right.
It doesn't have relationships. It doesn't have feelings and dreams and desires. It doesn't even know it exists. So why does it matter that she wants to get rid of it?
Right. And I mean, like, this is an area where, like, for sometimes pro-life people, especially like the younger pro-life people that we train, like, we might be the first ones helping them understand this is how pro-choice people think about personhood. When you read philosophers like Peter Singer talking about what makes a person, like, they don't think it's the same thing that we do.
Right.
They're naming things like what you just said, things like desires, things like self-awareness or having experiences or like things like that. And it's like, okay, the baby might have that down the road if it's allowed to grow up, but it doesn't have that right now. Even if it's a human, it doesn't have that at all. And so even just like putting it in the same ballpark with the woman, if it is pre-sentient, feels so strange and just off for pro-choice people because they think about personhood differently than, like, if you're like religious, you don't think about personhood having anything to do with being able to have desires. Like you're just like, oh, you're just always a person. Like, God made you that way. And it's just a different way of thinking about personhood.
And I think that one of the reasons people associate like feminists getting so angry when it comes to protecting abortion is I think that sometimes people who are in feminist culture are extra sensitive about the culture at large not valuing women's desires, dreams, hopes, relationships, and her life in the way that they think that people should. Like they see this history of, well, the woman's place is in the home. She has this like lesser calling, and men should go and desire and dream big and go invent awesome things or whatever. And like women aren't as important, and they don't matter. Their lives don't matter as much to the greater culture. Like they have this sensitivity, and that's how they see it. And so sometimes when they hear a pro-life person saying, well, embryo matters too in an equal way to woman, they're feeling like you wouldn't say that about a man. Like the embryo's life and value isn't equal to a man, but like it is equal to a woman. So that you're putting her in second place. They have this like sensitivity there that may not be true, may not be accurate.
Right.
All of that, you could argue about, but just know that's something that in feminist culture, she's extra sensitive to. So that's sometimes why they get so angry.
Right.
When you want to oppose abortion.
If they feel that, like, look, in our society right now, women or men are not equal right now. Women are down here as far as like how they're paid or whatever like that. Like they might have all these beliefs about that. So they're trying to tip the scales to at least make it equal, if not the other way around, depending on which feminist you're talking to. But it's like, at least like, come on, guys, let's have things be equal. And then they see the pro-life person and their view of what the pro-life person wants to do is make it even worse. It's like bring women like, no, like push our head down. No, it's like, and that's not what's going on for us. But you can understand if you feel like they're trying to make things even worse for women, especially based on like what they perceive to be a religious worldview. You're trying to force your religious views about personhood on them, and as a result, also push women further away from equality. Naturally, they're going to be upset.
Right. And they see like birth control and abortion as being one of those fundamental things that has leveled the playing field right up there with like vacuums and automatic washing and drying machines.
Right.
Or something. Like these inventions and all of this stuff has helped to level this out so that women can have these desires and dreams, equally pursued with men.
Right.
And that there are all these things in the way, and trying to take away abortion would be one of those really like non-starters or something, it's getting in the way. So given that this is a hidden thing that might be going on the pro-choice person's mind, that you should be kind of looking for, or at least aware might be there, I'm going to give you what I think is like a common phrase that if they say this might be something that's going on in their head.
Yeah.
Pretty much the concept of like the embryo is an unaware victim. So even if they are a victim, why does it really matter to kill them? If they're emphasizing that abortions mostly happen in the very early first trimester, well, most abortions happen before 8 weeks anyway. When you're asking them questions about fetal development, and they keep like referring to that statistic and that reality, this might be something that's playing a role for them. They're justifying abortion because, well, most of the time when the abortion is happening, it's happening to someone who doesn't care.
Yeah.
That fetus does not care if it lives, or the embryo, actually, it's important. Embryo doesn't care if it lives or dies because it doesn't even know it exists yet.
Right.
So therefore, it's okay to kill.
It's like no harm, no foul.
Right. Where woman, if you tell her, no, you have to have this baby, she's affected by that in a very deep, personal, lasting way that is completely changing the course of her life. And in the recent, self-defense, abortion is self-defense video, I talk about this as being a thing where sometimes I think pro-life people, they want to lean into, well, babies are a gift. They're a great thing. And you should embrace that. And God will bring about something good, even if this was an unplanned pregnancy.
Right.
Sometimes we want to lean into that. And I actually think that's an unhelpful direction to go because it's not really
Agreed.
a common ground thing with a vast majority of pro-choice people, especially if they're coming from a feminist culture, because they do not necessarily see that.
Right.
Most, especially for women who are seeking abortion, right? These women are women who do not see it as this pregnancy as a gift and a great thing. They want to get rid of that pregnancy because they have other things that they have on their plate.
Right.
And they're like, how dare you say that this baby is something she desires when it's not.
Right.
So that's something I would say maybe not look for. But if they're emphasizing, well, most abortions happen in a very early stage,
right,
this might be going on for them.
They might not feel like you can really harm someone who is not aware of the thing going on. And so this is a thing it's come up in my conversation about abortion for a really long time. This isn't a new thing. It's more of a rare thing, again, because I feel like a lot of pro-choice people lack this, like, no pun intended, the self-awareness, the awareness of this thing going on underneath the surface. But when it comes out is so important. And sometimes I might even bring it out because I think it's going on and I want to draw those hidden things up to the surface so we can talk about them. I can think of conversations I was having back in California in a lot of my college outreaches over there, even like before ERI, with pro-choice people where this would come up. And I've kind of pretty much always gone the same direction. There's a really helpful thought experiment that Dr. Frank Beckwith talks about. And maybe both of his books on abortion, but at least Defending Life, at least his most recent book on it. And I've just basically pull to Beckwith, okay? which is never a bad thing,
Right.
you know? The argument he wants to try to help the person understand you can harm someone even if they're not aware of it. And so the example that he gives, that the thought experiment is a woman in a temporary coma. She's completely out. This is not the kind of coma. I know there are comas where people, like, when they come out of it, they're like, oh, I was actually like aware of the things being said, or at least sometimes aware. It's like sometimes like they're really asleep, and then sometimes they're kind of frozen and they look asleep, but like they're actually hearing what doctors and family members are saying, or listening to the TV or whatever. So like there's different kinds of comas. This is like the classic coma. Okay. She's completely unconscious.
She's not going to remember anything from the time she was in the coma. Yeah.
She's not aware of anything during the coma. She won't remember anything after. And let's say at night, this is okay. So trigger warning. This is going to relate to sexual abuse.
If you have kids around or something, just be aware.
Yeah. I don't generally think our podcast is the best to listen to when kids are around. Probably if they're like really young. In this case, you've got, let's say, a perverted, like a hospital custodian or like a cleaner or someone like that who he works like the night shift, and then maybe he's going in and this beautiful woman is in this temporary coma and he is sexually molesting her at night sometimes, and it's like he never gets caught. And the idea is if she wakes up in a month or whatever, she's completely unaware. She has no idea this has happened. There's not physical ramifications or something like that. There's not some suspicion. Like it's just like it's kind of this unsolved crime. And what Beckwith and I want to say is, even though she's not aware of what happened, she was still harmed. Because human dignity is a thing. There was a violation. She was violated. Her dignity was violated. But generally speaking, people are more upset when someone goes through a sexual molestation thing and they are aware of it at the time. And I think that's natural. And so just to like pull the curtain back of something's going on, and we were just talking about this before the podcast started, like I am about halfway through the Netflix documentary series on the Jeffrey Epstein thing. And I would generally speaking, I think, encourage people to watch it, although it's very, very hard. It's the descriptions are very graphic. Like there are some people that shouldn't watch it. But the one good thing it is doing for me is that it is helping me feel even more empathy for victims of this or survivors of this. Where it's not like I didn't feel it before. Like
You're
I feel like
understanding their story more.
Yeah, I'm understanding, and also the effects that it can have. Like, everyone has their different experiences, but understanding the way some of the survivors talk about not specifically what happened at the time, but how it's affected their life since. It's kind of like listening to people talk about the racism stuff. It's just like, okay, I don't have to agree with every single thing every single person says, but I feel more empathetic now than I did 6 months ago about what it's like to live as an average African-American man in America. Like, I just feel more empathy for that now. And I'm glad. That's a good thing for me. And so when people watch, I think basically anyone watching the Epstein documentary or one of the many podcasts about this awful story or whatever, they feel so much sadness for the survivors who were fully aware of what was being done to them. And they're going to feel less sympathy for the woman in the temporary coma who is completely unaware. And I think that's normal. I think that's natural. But the point here is the woman in the coma was still harmed. It was still wrong what he did to her, even if she's completely unaware. And so you can harm someone who is unaware of it. There's another thought experiment that Beckwith uses also. I've gone here sometimes if the first one's not good enough, but he's making like the same chapter of his book. But just to kind of put all the cards out there, there's also this idea. This is a little bit more thought experimenty, but it's like, what if you've got this long lost uncle that you're like not aware of at all? It's like this like distant family member that you just for whatever reason have been like no one like knows this person exists, but you are related, and he's like a billionaire, okay? And he has this will, like he knows about you, but you don't know about him, and so like maybe he's been like Facebook stalking you, and he's like so proud of like what your accomplishments, or you're in college now or whatever. I'm going into a bit more detail than Beckwith does, and probably unnecessary detail, but that's what's going on, and so he dies.
Mhm.
You've never met him, but suddenly a lawyer shows up at your door basically saying, hey, your long lost uncle died and he left you $10 million in his will because he cares about you and he knew that you existed and he wanted to help. So here's this money. Okay, so that's the idea. But what if the lawyer or someone else who finds out about it before you do, like he discovers this thing and they figure out a way to steal your money? And so so no one ever shows up at your door. The money's gone. And just happens to be that, I don't know how this would actually work. It's a thought experiment. You just never find out.
Right.
Have you been harmed? If you're that person that the $10 million was stolen from, have you been harmed even though you don't know about the harm? And we would say yes.
It's
you
wrong
have
to
been
steal
harmed.
from you. Yeah.
Right. It's not just wrong that the person stole from you. You yourself have been harmed. You've been deprived of something. And so that's going to be an important point to bring up to pro-choice people.
So going back to like the comparison between these two situations, we're arguing that the woman in a coma has been harmed, wrong has been done to her. And it's not just because the janitor or whoever that is, the custodian, is like a worse person because he's doing this evil thing. It's not just that he's doing wrong things and like harming his own soul or something. There's actually like her dignity is being violated, whether or not she knows that that's happening.
Right.
When she wakes up from this coma, if she's never told about it,
Right.
she never finds out, she is still someone who has had wrong done to her,
Yes.
even if she isn't going to live with that pain.
Right.
In the same way where if you look at the survivor who, a survivor of Epstein or something, and, they lived through that pain, they have to cope with it and learn to move on and find healing, and like all of this other stuff is happening. We can have anger on behalf of those victims, want justice for both of them. We can agree that their human dignity was violated in both cases.
Yes.
But if we're evaluating like which one is worse, or which one do we at least feel emotions, which one is our emotion being triggered more by?
Right.
Our emotions are going to go to the survivor that is, dealing with that for the rest of her life.
Right.
And so that's not a wrong thing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make us a like moral monster
Right.
to say, I have more sympathy for the victim who remembers, or the survivor who remembers her abuse.
Right.
Like that's just how human nature works. That's just common sense.
Right.
We're angry for both of them.
Right.
We want justice for both of them.
Right.
And I think that if you tell this story to your pro-choice friends, they're going to agree with you.
Yeah.
They're going to say, yes, something has been done to the woman in the coma. And yeah, I have more sympathy for the woman in the second story. And we're going to apply that to abortion as well.
Right.
So maybe that late-term fetus who is going to experience a lot of pain as they're killed with an abortion, maybe we have more sympathy for that victim of abortion than we do for the 4-week embryo killed by a chemical abortion. And I think that's okay. It doesn't mean that they're not both wrong.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that they're not both victims. And I think helping to connect these lines in the conversation might be really helpful, because I think that acknowledging the role that compassion is playing in our intuition, when we think about the moral wrongness, the immorality of both situations, and saying that compassion, empathy, they can't get us there 100%. They can't help us reason about every situation.
Yeah.
Because if we were trying to like evaluate, maybe this, we were able to catch this guy on the security camera and we're going to put him on trial. If the jury is just, reasoning with their emotions, they're like, well, no harm, no foul. I mean, she doesn't even know she was hurt. She's not even here. Like, we're not going to tell her about it. Should this person get justice? Yes.
Right.
Yes. Lock him up.
We as the pro-life person can say, no, she was harmed.
Yeah.
Can't we agree that she was harmed even if she was in a coma when the sexual abuse happened?
Right. We're not just putting him in jail because we want to protect future victims that might find out.
Right.
We're going to put him away because we're seeking justice for that woman who was violated. And so I think talking about the role emotions can play, they can help us respond and care for people in our lives who have suffered traumas and tragedy.
Right.
And they can help us relate to other people. In some ways, they can help direct our intuitions about how things should be handled.
Right.
But they don't always get us all of the answers on their own.
Yeah.
We need to have a fundamental, understanding of how human dignity operates, what right and wrong the ethics of life, like we shouldn't use just our emotion. We need to have arguments too, and philosophy to play a role. And I think that this is a way to demonstrate that.
Yeah. So this is actually something that came up in a different conversation I had with someone, but exactly the point that you're making. And so there was this talk I gave at Miami University, and I've told a little story before, so some people might have heard. There was this kind of funny thing that happened where the Students for Life Club leader who was walking me through the thing said like, "Hey, I've got this person I really want you to meet today. He's the pro-choice Josh Brum." It's like, I don't know what that means, but there's this philosophy professor. I don't remember his name at the moment, but but I met him and he was a super nice guy. I so want to hang out with him more if we're ever in town. I tried to continue the email exchange. He's been too busy to really keep it going. But basically, he came to the event. He listened. It was a bodily rights talk. There was the security there. There was like protesters. There was an anti-Josh Brum table downstairs. It was a whole thing. But everything was fine. And I gave the talk. There was some Q&A. He asked one of the questions. It was a good question, but it was respectful. I answered it, I think, well. And then after the talk, they basically said, and this I've never experienced before, is like, hey, in the room next door, we've set up cookies and punch and like hot chocolate and stuff like that. And so anyone who wants to come and mingle, Josh will be there too, kind of a thing. And so I think a lot of Students for Life Club kids came hey, hang out with Josh. But frankly, I ended up spending most of my time with that philosophy professor and this other pro-choice student that came. And then basically these pro-life students just kind of watched for 2 hours or so, or maybe it was an hour. I don't know. It was a long time as we all talked about different things. And me and this professor, we actually spent a lot more time not talking about abortion, but more talking about things like criminal justice reform. Because he kind of said I'm going to have to think about what you said about abortion. It was really interesting. He's like, I think basically you have better arguments on abortion than I do. You'd probably have me pro-life in 20 minutes. So we can do that later. Let's talk about this. It's like, okay. So there's a really good rapport. He was really, really friendly. Yeah. But we got to talking about prison reform. And he made this interesting point. He's kind of on that side of kind of let's really, really change prisons. Let's maybe go to more of a Sweden or Norway kind of a model. It's kind of this is really about rehabilitation, not as much about retributive justice. And there's a lot of interesting points he made, and we had a nice back and forth. We have some common ground. But he made this point that I disagreed with, where he said, if you ask, a lot of times, he's people who want to put someone in jail for a long time for some crime, they're doing that because they're wanting justice on behalf of the victims of, the burglary or whatever the thing was. But he says, actually, if you, especially even some of the real, the capital crimes, if you ask the victim's family, after a murder or something, do you want this person executed or do you want something less? He's a lot of times the family wants more mercy given than what the courts or the prosecutor or whatever wants to give. And so he said, we should really take into account the way people emotionally feel, what is it that they want to have happen? Yeah. Because a lot of times they want to have mercy. And so I had never heard that argument before, but I was so proud of myself because I had a good counter that just came up. And I said, okay, but what about the people who don't want mercy? They want to heap on, how much punishment can we give this person? Yeah. I don't think you want to bring their emotions and have that direct everything. So are you saying we should only have it be the merciful people, their emotions directed? And if not, how do we make that work? And he was like, I haven't thought about that. That's a really interesting point. I'm going to think about that and get back to you. But that's kind of the point is hey, yes, I don't want to be let's all be robots. Let's take emotion completely out of it. It is good for us watching the Epstein documentary or whatever to feel a lot of emotion, to feel rage about what was being done and how catastrophic and how many people were being harmed. Yes, but it shouldn't be purely emotion either. There needs to also be some rubrics, some principles that we're working off of so we, end up with the right conclusions on these things.
Yeah. And I mean, the first time that I really struggled with this concept we're talking about today was in a conversation. And I was still a student, but it wasn't on campus. It was at a big art fair they have in Ann Arbor every year. It's 100,000 people come. It's huge. And I was at the
Wow.
like Right to Life booth, but I had taken over the Right to Life booth and turned it into like a sorrel table. And so I had like my pool table set up. It was a good day. Actually, it was awful because I had a lot of like old people just come up and yell at me.
Yeah.
But my best dialogues were with young people, surprise. And there was this guy, I really liked talking with him because he was really well read. And I think he had a philosophy degree. He was like getting a master's in something. And I don't really remember all the details. But I remember his big thing was like something along the lines of self-awareness. And he was like, he had set me up for a gotcha question because he had said like a I gotcha thing. And it was, which is worse, a late-term abortion where the fetus is dismembered or a chemical abortion where the embryo is expelled from the uterus? And I had never been asked that before. And I had never really thought about it before that much. This is just not something that had kind of crossed my mind because I was so like focused forward on other things. I was like, the late-term abortion where the child is suffering. Like the fetal pain has to make it worse. How could it not be?
Right.
And he was like,
I knew he would say that. I knew there was going to be the
He
next
was like,
thing.
so you don't think they're equal?
Yeah.
Because if they were equal, then they would be the same. And I felt cornered. I was like, I think he has me, but let me think about it. And and I was like, okay, I need a second to process. And he was like, okay.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't, but like he was like,
I'm just going to sit here in the glow of my just beating the pro-life person. Yeah.
Right.
I love that you did that.
sucked.
I love
It
that you said, let me have a second to think about that because it's like you don't want him to walk away. And at a fair booth, I've done fair booths too. It's awful. It's like there's like 1,000 distractions around.
Right.
You don't want him to leave, but you also need time to process. I love that. Okay, continue.
And to be fair, like I had a fair amount of outreach at this point. I mean, this was my senior year or something. And so I at least knew to do that, which I'm thankful for. But I felt trapped. And I was like, okay, so why do I think that the late term abortion is worse?
Right.
Well, because of my emotions. And should my emotions be the reason that this thing is more valuable than this other thing? And I was trying to like think through that.
Right.
And I think I tried to articulate that. It was like, the reason I think it's worse is because there's suffering involved.
Yeah.
And I think that if you kill someone and there's no suffering, I think I had used like a lethal injection, like euthanasia of a disabled person or something. I said like, if we euthanize with a lethal injection a disabled person when they're asleep and they don't know they've been killed.
Yep.
I think that was the example, which I don't know if is the best, but I think it helped articulate what I was trying to say, which was just because someone's not brutally killed, in a Ted Bundy way, doesn't mean that it's not murder or homicide or something awful is happening.
Right.
And so it's not just evaluation on pain, but fetal pain being earlier and earlier is something that I might bring up in the conversation because the science is getting more clarity on when exactly the unborn can feel pain. And I think that does sometimes influence people where they think the line should be drawn. Right.
And I'll link to a source about that. I'm hoping to at some point do a podcast with one or both of the researchers that did this work. And we've talked about it before, but I will link to a resource. I know Secular Pro-Life has done a really good article and I think an interview with one of those people about how fetal pain probably that they think begins younger. There's a pro-life and a pro-choice researcher that work together on this thing. Like let's just go for truth.
Right.
Regardless of what we end up thinking about the
Yeah.
conclusion about the legality of abortion afterward, let's just focus on the science. And it's really interesting. But you've also got to be careful as a pro-lifer because while it probably starts earlier, it doesn't probably start so early that most of the abortions are now being done on babies that are like tortured to death. It's still they're thinking it happens like late first trimester, early second trimester, as opposed to like late second trimester, early third trimester. It's a difference, but it's not most of the abortions.
Right. And so we might one day have scientific evidence that these, 6-week embryos feel the pain. Right now, we don't have that evidence.
Yeah.
And so I think that while it's good to bring it up in the conversation, I would probably bring it up as one of the last things.
Yes.
My goal is to help them understand that fetal pain can help us have empathy for those unborn children that die, but it shouldn't be our reasoning. in why abortion is wrong.
Right.
And so that's like my first goal. And if I can't get them there in the conversation, I might give them some more to chew on and help them realize that a lot of the abortions that are happening, that are legal, should be illegal. I'm trying to help them get a little bit further back, maybe.
So I might be thinking about this a little bit differently than you. I'm not sure if there's a difference, but let's see. Let's wade into it a little bit. So I have a similar story to your gotcha question thing, but my answer was really similar, but different different in a certain way that might spell out like the difference. And so come back at me if you think if you think I said it in a worse way or something, but I got a gotcha question guy who asked me like the exact same question. Luckily at this point, like I think I probably had at this like more experience at this point on it. So I didn't have that moment where I felt busted or whatever. Like I've had that with other questions, but in this one I felt pretty ready to go, where I basically said, no. I'm against them both. I think I think in both cases an equally valuable person was killed. But I think when the late term baby is dismembered, there's like a second wrong thing done, which is something like torture. So like when I think, and I use a pretty similar thought experiment with you, it's like I've seen 24, okay? Like there are a lot of really grisly ways that people can be tortured to death that you see on that show. This is why not everyone should watch that show, frankly. But like there's really, really horrible ways that you can kill someone versus a lethal injection. And so what I want to say is it doesn't make me say lethal injection is fine. I just want to say if you kill someone by torturing them to death, you've done it's either an even more wrong thing or it's like two wrong things. You've killed them both. That's like equal. You've killed an innocent person. But in one case also, you've inflicted all kinds of suffering on them, and that is also wrong. And so that's why, yes, if I'm going to, I agree there's an emotional thing too. So I'm going to feel more emotionally sad for the person suffering torture. But at a moral level, I still think it's equally valuable people being killed, and that's wrong, even if there are even more harmful things that you can do in the process of killing someone.
I think I'm okay with that answer if it's explicitly clear the killing is the primary wrong or the more wrong thing, and then there's this like secondary thing going on. I do think that there is an order there, and I think if you can emphasize that, like go for it.
Right.
It's almost the same as like someone, physically assaulting someone and then also like stealing their car.
Right.
It's like, stealing the car is the second wrong, but like harming the person themselves, like that's way worse.
Right.
And so I would want there to be that clarity.
I think most people on an intuition level agree on that. I think you are going to meet some people who would say it's actually worse to torture someone than to kill them. And so sometimes you might, that conversation might have to happen at that point. But a lot of, I think, even pro-choice people will agree that even if they're coming kind of from a Don Marquis future of value kind of a place, like, yes, killing is worse than torture, even though both are really wrong.
I think the reason I would do the primary, secondary thing in the abortion conversation is I'm not satisfied giving the child a painkiller before the abortion, which is sometimes what we push for. And I think that like, that's not gonna, if the person comes back at me and asks me that question, well, like, what if we just give them anesthesia? I'm not satisfied.
This has been the natural response from the pro-choice side when they hear about this new fetal pain research. They're like, fine, okay, we're just going to anesthetize all the babies before we kill them. It's like, hey, the pro-life movement is not like, oh, well, cool, then we're good. No. Our main thing is we're killing innocent people. Obviously, we don't want them feeling pain while they're being killed, but our big thing is we should not kill innocent people.
And just for like factual clarity as well, just so you know, most abortion practitioners are against giving pain relief to the child because it causes an additional risk for the woman to pass through the abdomen for that injection. It causes extra like risk or whatever. So usually they actually will push back. I don't think it's because they're coming from a place of like evil. They just want that child to suffer, to be clear, because that's something that would be easy to misunderstand.
Right.
They know that could hurt
They're
the woman.
weighing things differently.
Right. For better, for worse. And I just want to also like a minor takeaway from this subject is for when we're making moral judgments about pro-choice people, which hopefully you try to restrain yourself from as much as possible. But I think sometimes the pro-life community makes a moral judgment about pro-choice people when it comes to this subject.
Yeah.
Where they're like a monster for not valuing the embryo in an emotional way. And I don't think that that's true.
Yeah.
And I would say it's okay to be pro-life and not have emotional feelings about the early unborn child.
Right.
I don't think that should be your driving thing. And I actually think that it is a driving thing for a lot of people.
Yes.
Like, let's be real. A lot of people are so passionate about abortion, not just because of the outstanding numbers of victims, not just because of, I don't know, how prevalently it is in our culture and it's hurting our families and our friends and, people we know. But oftentimes, the thing that really drives the pro-life community is, but that poor innocent baby.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's a weak thing to believe. I certainly have that emotional feeling about abortion victims, especially when I look at abortion imagery.
Mm-hmm.
But I have that more for late-term abortion than I do for early-term abortion. Even if that's like your primary motivation for doing the pro-life activism, I don't think it's a bad thing. But to judge someone for not having that, whether they're pro-life or pro-choice, I think would be a mistake. I don't know if I'm articulating that right, but I just encourage you to kind of think about, this is just an intuitive thing that might affect different people different ways, depending on their past, depending on their life experience and what's in front of them.
Yeah. So I'm inclined to say something. Tell me if you disagree with it.
Sure.
It's like a little bit of a different angle on that idea. Is I want to say, I think a lot of people, when they first come into the pro-life movement, it often has to do with emotions.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you've got some people came in because they saw abortion images. You've got a lot of people that came in because of they heard a pro-life speech. I know people who are now doing full-time pro-life work or something like pro-life work because they were at a youth group and a pro-life speaker came in. I know a couple of people that came because I was a speaker at a thing, and then like 10 years later I find out now they're basically doing pro-life work. It's like, awesome, that's really cool. But it's like in the beginning, a lot of people, there's like an emotional thing going on. They see fetal development images and they hear that abortion is happening and they're like, this is wrong, and like just gets them to the core. And so I think that's really natural. And I want to say, for the people who come in and it's mainly they have this emotional attachment to the embryo, and that's what's driving them, I want to say it would be a good thing for them to end up in a place where it's not primarily an emotional thing. Mm-hmm. It's like our philosophical compass is pointing true north. And it's like, no, even if we don't feel emotional about the baby right now, it is still being victimized. It is still being killed, and it's wrong for these principles. And I don't want to ever say emotions should be completely gone. I think philosophers sound like that a lot. It's like, no, let's just be perfect like little robots. It's like, that's not what I'm saying.
Act rationally.
Yes.
Just be rational.
It's terrible. And some of us sound like that sometimes, and that's not what we intend to sound like, even if we do sound like that sometimes. Emotion should be part of it. It is part of how God created us. But I don't think it should be the primary driver. Would you disagree with any of that?
I think I agree. And I would also add that I think that if emotion is what is driving your conviction, it might not sustain you.
Yeah, you're less likely to stay on.
I think eventually you will burn out. And the reason I brought this up is because I see pro-choice people lobbing, judgment and insults among our circles, like towards the other side. Well, they're just so emotional.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, but you're emotional too. And emotional is not an insult. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Should it be the only thing sustaining you? No, because you will burn out. And I will tell you, when clinic escorts who are there on behalf of the abortion facility to bring clients in, they oftentimes will be a short-lived volunteer. Now, sometimes they're there long-term. That's true. But oftentimes you will see them come, they'll be around for a few months and then they'll leave.
Yeah.
And the thing that's driving their conviction, not their belief, because belief, is really more rational. Conviction, I think, is more like you're putting that belief into action. And oftentimes that bridge is emotion.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually good. We want conviction. But if they're running on emotional energy, they might be there. They're yelling at the pro-life, prayer warrior, cyber counselor, whoever's there. Yeah. And there's like this tension. And then you'll see the pro-life person keep going back, and they'll change in and out.
Yeah.
They'll have these different cycles. And I think that that's just something that is going to happen on both sides, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think the more we can help tap into their emotion for the unborn child in a way that humanizes the child, that's not manipulative, but helping them see something that they might be missing.
Yes.
Because I think that they are overlooking that.
Yes.
And that's another thing. Their evaluation, if you're just thinking about mom and you're not thinking about baby too, you're making a mistake. And if you're thinking about just baby and you're not thinking about mom too, you're also making a mistake. And so I think having our emotions in the appropriate place, holding on to them, not trying to let them go, but directing them with our rationality, with our arguments, with our belief system, we're going to be better off.
Yeah. Okay. Before we wrap up, I just want to say, by the time this comes out, everyone, well, not everyone, not everyone's reading every single email or social media post we do, but a lot of people are going to know that you've resigned by this point. In fact, you've resigned like a month ago, but you gave us a lot of time to kind of have with you. And we're going to be still releasing podcasts with you for a while because we worked really, really hard I want to record as many podcasts with Rachel as possible while she's still here. I've been slowing down everything else on my plate just to like optimize my final, wonderful kind of 6 weeks with you. And so this will be out later, and that might be a little bit weird for people, but whatever.
If you saw the announcement, and you're like wondering how many more episodes are with Rachel.
This is the last one. This is the last one. And so I just want to say you have done fantastic work here. It has been so good to work with you. I think the best compliment a boss can give to an employee who's resigned is to say, I would hire you again, and I would hire you again in a heartbeat. Your work, I think, a lot of times people don't get to see how hard people work behind the scenes or the quality of the work. Luckily, you help produce things that people can see. And so if people watch the advanced module, for example, that you helped complete, there was this huge project that the philosophy team worked for years on. They see this mega self-defense video that we put out. That was a lot of Rachel. Doesn't mean no one else helped, but that was a lot. That was I'm just telling you as the guy, I'm well aware. That was a big Rachel project. The Cyber Counseling Masterclass, especially the workbook, that was totally a Rachel idea. That was never going to happen. My thing was we were just going to make a bunch of videos with Jacob and call it a day. And then Rachel's like, there's so many stories. We need to really pull out the different things. We need to have tips, and we need to have all the stuff in a workbook. And then you made this beautiful thing. So you've done fantastic work here. I'm so sorry to see you go, but I wish you just the best in wherever you end up. I know you're going to be awesome at whatever you decide to do, but we just kind of want to take a chance to just kind of celebrate you real quick and just say, you've been awesome.
Thank you. And I just want to thank our listeners, for being along for the ride and for, having someone actually read my blog posts and watch the videos. It's really great. You guys mean a lot to us. And I just, I appreciate all of the activism that our followers are doing behind the scenes that no one gets to see. And, even if just one person takes an argument that we produce and uses it, that's worth it.
This podcast isn't going away. Rachel won't be my co-host. It's very sad. There will still be podcasts. I've already scheduled a bunch of podcasts with different people. I think you're going to see me interviewing people, interesting people more often. And so I've got some different, I've got 3 or 4 people kind of in the works that have sent me interesting emails or different things like that. I'm like, let's do a podcast. Let's put together an outline for a podcast. There might be some podcasts that's just me talking like I did with the Marsha Jones thing last year. And that might happen sometimes. We're still kind of playing around with some different ideas, but the podcast isn't going anywhere. But this is our last one with Rachel, and it makes us sad, but you're awesome. Thanks so much for serving ERI so well.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Equipped for Life podcast, a project of Equal Rights Institute. Equal Rights Institute uses speaking, writing, YouTube videos, podcasts, online courses, and campus outreach to help pro-life advocates in the areas of practical dialogue tips, relational apologetics, pro-life philosophy, and sidewalk counseling. If you've been helped by this podcast, please consider supporting it by making a donation at equalrightsinstitute.com.